And now, I'll just make a short introduction. Dick Schaefer is a wonderful Seventh-day Adventist historian. He has the latest information, and I understand this is a brand new message you haven't presented before. Is that true? Yes. So we're privileged to have this brand new presentation. And Brother Schaefer, God bless you. The time is yours.
Actually, I've never made this presentation before, but this is a compilation of presentations. But there is part of this that I've never given anywhere before. In fact, when I was putting it together today, I was overcome with emotion.
Amen.
And I may have to have somebody help me at that time when I come to that section. I appreciated the music, especially the piano player and the song service. Sang some songs that I haven't sung for since I was a youth. I'm a member of the Forest Falls Church, and last Sabbath we had visitors from Desert Hot Springs. And we have a woman who plays the piano very well, and her name is Charlie. And we had a speaker one time who told us that he knew of a woman in Texas who played the piano like Charlie did, and her name was Bill. Back in the 1830s, there were two giants of American medicine up in the New England states. One was Dr. Gallup, the other was Dr. Tully. Gallup believed in bleeding people, and it was his theory that inflammation and fever were caused by the patient having too much blood. So he removed the blood, ounce by ounce. The temperature dropped, but too often it continued to drop, and many of those patients died, including a man named George Washington. He begged his physician to leave him alone and let him die in peace after they had removed at least 32 ounces of his blood. Wow. Tully believed in drugging people. It was his theory that we should tear down the patient's body artificially by the use of strong drugs. And then as the body is overcoming this drugging, it would automatically overcome the causes of the original sickness. He and his colleagues used calomel, opium, prussic acid, lunar caustic, antimony, arsenic, heroin, mercury, chloroform, and strychnine. Wow. By the 1860s, there were a number of health reform movements in existence in this country, but from the very beginning, the Seventh-day Adventist approach was distinctive. It was motivated by the belief that the human body is the temple of God.
Amen.
And that seeking, preserving, and promoting good health is an outward expression of inward faith and Christian love. To Seventh-day Adventists, 1 Corinthians 6, 19 and 20 is a clear directive for healthful living. What, know you not that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost, which is in you, which you have of God, and you are not your own, for you are bought with a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. Yeah. You see, medieval Christians believed that it was impossible for a good Christian to be healthy. They thought the spirit was good, but the flesh was evil. Adventists said, on the contrary, God created both the body and the spirit, and they work in harmony with each other.
Amen.
Therefore, it's not a denial of faith to care for the body. Our pioneers observed that Jesus Christ, they called the great physician, spent more time healing than preaching, and believed that medical missionary work was a good way to demonstrate to others the kindness and compassion of God. So in May of 1866, the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, meeting in Battle Creek, Michigan, was persuaded that they should have their own medical institution. They were persuaded by a remarkable Battle Creek housewife named Ellen G. White.
Amen.
And I'm speaking to students at Loma University. I tell them we would not be in this room tonight if it were not for Ellen G. White. When I'm talking to the Proton Support Group, I told them if I were to tell you about our Proton Treatment Center and I failed to mention to you that Dr. James Slater had won international awards and recognition for computer-assisted radiation therapy treatment planning, I would not be giving credit where credit is due. We need to give credit where credit is due. Ellen Harmon was her maiden name. She was walking home from the 3rd grade, we think. We know that she was 9 years of age, with her fraternal twin sister Elizabeth and a classmate. The 3 little girls were threatened by a 13-year-old girl. The Harmon girls had always been taught if ever they were in any kind of danger, they should run home, and so they started running home with their classmate. 13-year-old girl picked up a rock and took up the chase, and she hurled the rock at the 3 little girls, just as Ellen turned around to see if the older girl were catching up. Well, an accident happened. The rock smashed into Ellen's face. It broke her nose, it disfigured her face, and it knocked her unconscious to the ground. She was helped to a nearby store where she bled profusely. One kind gentleman offered to take her home in his carriage, but she refused because she didn't want to soil the man's carriage. Evidently, the adults in this store didn't realize how seriously this little Methodist girl had been injured, or they would have insisted on helping her to go home. Instead, she collapsed again shortly after leaving the store. Her sister and classmate had to carry her almost all the way home, where she lay for several weeks, semi-comatose, in a large cradle that had been prepared for her. Her father returned from a trip to Atlanta, Georgia 2 months after the incident and didn't even recognize his own daughter because her face had been so badly disfigured by this incident. She went back to school, but she was unable to learn. I suppose today we would say she suffered a learning handicap. She tried again when she was 12 years of age and couldn't take the pressure. So she dropped out with what we believe to be less than 3 years of formal education. It seemed impossible for me to study and retain what I learned, she later wrote. My nervous system was prostrated and my hand trembled, so that I made but little progress in writing and could get no farther than the simple copies in coarse hand. Thank you. Ellen White was her married name. She died in 1915 at the age of 87.
Awesome.
She had said, I could get no farther than the simple copies in coarse hand. Yet this remarkable woman, with this meager educational background, went on to write more serious books that have been published in more languages, that have wider distribution than has any other woman in history. She wrote in areas that she had absolutely no formal education and very little experience. She wrote in the field of education, the foundation for the world's largest Protestant educational system. Today, there are almost 2 million students in this educational system, including the students at Loma University. An interesting story can be told about her writings in education. The Minister of Education for Serbia came to the United States for advanced study in education. He attended Columbia University. He was already a well-educated man. He had 1 master's degree and 2 doctorates. One of his doctoral degrees was in education. While he was here, he was expected to write a book on education for Serbia. When he went home, he had his book. His book was lauded by his countrymen as a masterpiece. It bears the stamp of approval of the local Orthodox Church. Ironically, his book, published in 1912, is a word-for-word translation of Ellen White's book, Education, published in 1903.
Awesome. Amen.
Interesting. Now, evidently, there was a lot of literary borrowing that was going on in those days, and I'm not criticizing him. But I mentioned because I think it's outstanding, especially when you consider the educational background of the 2 authors and the subject of the book.
Amen.
She wrote in the field of medicine when patients were being bled to death and drugged to death. She argued for rational methods of therapy which were completely against the medical practices of her day. Good nutrition, rest, exercise, sunshine, proper use of water, fresh air, abstinence from alcohol and tobacco, and trust in divine power. You know, we call those the 8 natural remedies. It's my personal belief that the 8 natural remedies is what led National Geographic magazine in November of 2005 to name Loma Linda residents among America's longevity all-stars. They had an article where they featured longevity, 3 places on the planet: Okinawa, Sardinia, and Loma Linda, California.
Amen.
The same author wrote a book called The Blue Zones. Now there are 5. Loma Linda is still the only blue zone in the United States of America. She said there was electricity inside the human body. She talked about electrical currents. Before there were such things as electrocardiograms, vectorcardiograms, electroencephalograms, and electromyograms.
Amen.
She called tobacco a poison of the most deceitful and malignant kind in 1864, exactly 100 years before the famous United States Surgeon General's report entitled Smoking and Health of 1964. In making a point in the field of nutrition, she said, "The whys and wherefores of this I know not, but I give you the instruction as it is given me." I looked it up. She was talking about the intake of salt. What would she have to say about that? As far as I know, nobody else said what she said. What she said was unusual. Singular is a word they would have used in those days to describe it. One of the health reformers said that salt was a mineral poison and should never be taken.
Wow.
She said our bodies need salt,
Big time.
but she says we need to take it very sparingly. Ellen White's position was confirmed in the January 1977 Senate Select Committee report on nutrition and human needs entitled Dietary Goals for the United States, the first time the United States government had ever issued such a report. Ellen White never called herself a prophet. She never held a church office. We do not worship Ellen White, nor do we consider her writings to be more important than Scripture. She called herself a messenger. And it's very meaningful to us that she was a humble, compassionate Christian woman. Her main goal in life was the uplifting of humanity by the uplifting of Jesus Christ.
Amen. Awesome.
During her lifetime, someone has calculated that she had approximately 2,000 visions. When I'm talking to the public, like the Proton Support Group, I tell them they were dream-like experiences. But they were so vivid to her that she was able to write down what she saw and share that with church leaders. Dr. Kell Reynolds, one of my historian predecessors, called her an intrepid little woman in a black bonnet who coaxed and prodded the reluctant men of the cloth into purchasing this hill we call Loma Linda back in 1905 when there was no money available.
Amen.
The first time she saw Loma Linda in this special way, I believe, was on October 10, 1901. And I will come back to this later. She had another one of these visions in the fall of 1904. Following that, she wrote to church leaders in ways of denomination would be able to purchase unoccupied properties in Southern California for much less than their original cost and use them as sanitariums. The Paradise Valley facility near San Diego represented an investment of $25,000. It was offered to us for $12,000 and eventually purchased for $4,000. The Glendale Hotel, now Glendale Adventist Medical Center, represented an investment of $50,000. I saw one figure as high as $65,000. Was offered to us for $26,000 and eventually purchased for $12,000.
Amen.
She urged a young man, a young minister named John Burden, to come to the area between Riverside, San Bernardino, and Redlands to look for this property she'd seen in this special way. When Burden arrived, he found a place called Loma Linda, been built by land speculators back in the 1880s, and it represented an investment of $155,000. The caretakers were authorized to move it for $110,000. Well, that was completely out of the question. Burden left. Mrs. White urged Burden to return. This time they dropped their price to $85,000. Well, that was like $85 million for our church members. We only had 1,400 in all of Southern California. They were helping to pay for their own 22 churches and these other 2 sanitariums, and our general conference had just established a no-debt policy and couldn't help. Under these circumstances, the intrepid little woman in a black bonnet urged Burton to return. This time they dropped the price to $45,000. He asked them if they were really serious in selling Loma Linda, what would be their bottom dollar, and they said, we'll settle for $40,000. And the terms of the deal were $5,000 down, 3 monthly payments of $5,000. That was the first half of it, and the remaining $20,000 at the end of 3 years. People came to sign the papers on Friday, May 26, 1905. As the day wore on and the Sabbath approached, they decided to postpone the signing of the papers until the following Monday. On the intervening Sunday, Burton received a telegram from George W. Reeser, the brand new president of the Southern California Conference. He had just been appointed that position at the 1905 General Conference session near Washington, D.C. His telegram came from Washington, D.C. We have it. He said, developments here warrant advising, do not make deposit on sanitarium. Whoa, what's Pastor Burton supposed to do now? He's a Christian gentleman, he's made a deal, it's a good deal. It's been approved by the messenger, and his new boss tells him to kill it. Monday morning, King Burton went ahead and put $1,000 down to secure an option to buy Loma Linda. He signed, taking personal responsibility for it. It was his.
Awesome.
He did not commit the denomination, he did not commit insubordination. It's under these circumstances that we can better understand the kind of faith that marked Pastor Burton and those who rallied behind him in the purchase and development of Loma Linda. Before another dollar was spent, Ellen White showed up with her son Willie on their way back home to the Napa Valley from the 1905 General Conference session near Washington, D.C. They detrained at Redlands Junction, which is now the Bryn Mawr section of Loma Linda. They came in on a horse-drawn express wagon. I found out that's a wagon that was used in those days to move luggage around train depots. When she saw this, she said, I've been here before. Willie, who would know he was her constant attendant and companion, said, no, Mother, you've never been here. Then this is the very place I was shown, she said. And she repeated that several times as she was taken around the property. When they got to the recreation hall on top of the hill, there were card tables and there were cards on the floor. There were billiard tables. There was a bowling alley on the south side of that building. She spoke about the educational work the Seventh-day Adventist Church would someday conduct in Loma Linda.
Awesome.
I was born right over the footprint of that building. That afternoon, in the grand parlor of the luxury hotel, which would be right here, those two windows, she spoke on her favorite subject, the great medical missionary. And then she retired from her travels. There were about 20 brethren with her, and they called them the brethren in those days too. And they started a heated discussion. If I were to summarize it in one sentence, it could be, what are we doing here? On one hand, they all had a very high regard for the woman they called Sister White. On the other hand, there was no money in sight. And it may have been worse than they thought, because they may not have known what I'm going to tell you right now. The first time someone wanted to develop this property was a group of men who got together in April of 1875. They called themselves the Mound City Land Association. They called the hill a mound. They were encouraged by the fact that the Southern Pacific Railroad had just established a right-of-way somewhat diagonally through the property, headed for San Mateo Canyon and the East Coast. It was going to be a transcontinental railroad. Hadn't even laid the tracks yet. They failed. They sold to a farmer named H.E. Hills. Mr. Hills plowed up Mound City, planted crops and orchards, got sick and died. But before he died, he and his wife sold to the Mound City Land and Water Company. And in 1887, the San Bernardino City and County Director claimed that this area, because of its proximity to Colton and San Bernardino, would probably never amount to anything more than a possible way station on the Southern Pacific Railroad. Well, evidently, the Mound City Land and Water Company didn't read that, because that's the year they started building this luxury hotel, which they opened the next year in 1888. This looked so good from the outside that Scipio Craig, the editor of the Citrograph, which was a Redlands weekly that was popular throughout Southern California, wrote that this may someday become world famous as a health resort. And they failed. The place was vacant for almost 12 years. And then the Loma Linda Association came to town. They're the ones who gave it the name Loma Linda. Changed the name from Mound City to Loma Linda. Spanish name literally meaning hill pretty, or as we say in English, pretty hill. They refurbished the hotel. They built 5 cottages on the east crest of the hill. They built the recreation hall. They sent their business manager, Mr. Milton Eske, up to the St. Helena Sanitarium to find out how do Seventh-day Adventists operate a successful sanitarium. We had an excellent reputation as a church. He went up there and became a patient. He took notes. He bought the same equipment. He hired nurses. He had a steward and chef for his dining facilities. They got food from their own dairy, orchards, and gardens. That looked so good from the outside that the Southern Pacific Railroad scheduled 6 train stops a day at the privately operated Loma Linda Depot, and they failed. There were times when they didn't even have one patient. So our people didn't even have to do a feasibility that day, June 12, 1905, if such a thing were available, to know for sure that what John Burton and Ellen White wanted to do here wouldn't work. But there were people of faith who came up with the rest of the $4,000 to make the down payment of $5,000. Research came back from the General Conference. So it was happening in his new territory. So he called 2 meetings represented by almost all of his 22 churches. One of them was held in the Carr Street Seventh-day Adventist Church. Ellen White was there. In that meeting, he said, according to Sister White, Loma Linda should someday become our principal training school on this coast. At that instant, she interrupted him and shouted, "This will be!"
Awesome.
Now you may wonder, how does he know she said it like that? He wasn't there. I read it in a book, but it didn't tell me she said it like that. Actually, the book didn't record it correctly. You know, historians like to look at original documents. We call them primary sources. I contacted the Southern California Conference and I requested minutes. I got them. They're on my desk in the Del Webb Library. On page 3, research talking. And as soon as he says principal training school on this coast, it says right in the minutes that she interrupted him with those words, "This will be," the only words in the entire minutes that were recorded in all capital letters and underlined.
That's loud.
Pardon?
That's loud.
Yeah. When we see that on the internet, we call that shouting. We purchased this property and opened the Loma Linda Sanitarium in October of 1905.
Amen.
In 1909, we started the School of Medicine, and this are 9 of the first 10 student physicians. The lady on the upper step is the first graduate of our School of Medicine. Her name was Zoe Nightingale. You ever heard that name before? She's a relative of Florence Nightingale, the pioneer modern nurse who became known as the Lady with the Lamp because she made night rounds during the Crimean War. Today we have graduated more than 11,000 students, more than 11,000 physicians. That's almost 2,000 more than any other School of Medicine in the Western United States. Well, there was a graduate of the American Medical Missionary School in Battle Creek, Michigan, named Alfred Q. Shryock. Here's Alfred Shryock and his wife Stella teaching a class in histology, or microscopic anatomy. He was the president of his senior class of 1899. That was the School of Medicine that was started by Dr. John Harvey Kellogg in 1895 and ended in 1910 when advanced medical education moved to Loma. But he went up to Seattle, built a brand new home on Queen Anne Hill, which is a residential suburb of Seattle, moved the hydrotherapy unit to a better part of town, started a little private practice, became wealthy, built this brand new home. So he and his wife and their 2-year-old son, Harold, you all know Harold Shryock. He wrote our sex education books on becoming a man and on becoming a woman. They came on their vacation in 1908 to see the new sanitariums that had been started in Southern California. Especially they were interested in the one in Loma, London, because it had such a spectacular beginning. While he was here, he was told by the medical staff that we're going to start a School of Medicine at the request of Ellen G. White. And they knew that he had taught histology at the American Medical Association, American Medical Missionary College, as a student. And so they asked him to join the faculty of this new School of Medicine. On their way home to Seattle, he told Stella, "I don't care to be part of a one-horse medical school." The Loma physicians corresponded with him, requesting that he join the faculty. He refused them each time. John Burton wrote him a letter and offered him $20 a month, or was it $20 a week? And he rejected that. He wrote back and he said he would be unable to meet his financial obligations on $20 a week. Burton wrote back and says, "We'll offer you $21 a week." Well, Shryock's thought, we shouldn't just outright reject this. We know all those people. We went to school with them in Battle Creek. Maybe the Lord is in this. So we should pray about this, and they asked God for a sign. If he wanted them to move to Loma, would he help them sell their brand new home on Queen Anne Hill? That would be a very useful sign, don't you think? So on his way to work one day, Shryock stopped at the realtor's office and listed his home for sale. That home was sold by noon and was in escrow by sundown.
Awesome.
The Lord had made it perfectly clear where he wanted them. And he came and taught every medical student for the first 50 years of the school's history. Now, I left off something. I was asked to make a presentation tonight on Providence. I just shared some of that with you. But there's something that I need to tell you which is one of the most providential parts of Loma's history. After Reeser, and after Ellen White said, "This will be," The conference committee of the church got behind the project, and we're meeting in Los Angeles on the deadline day of the first $5,000 payment. And they didn't have $1. Now, there were two camps of people there. There were people of faith who said we need to go forward in faith. And then there were realists who said, we don't have the money. What do you suppose we should do? And I wondered, why did Ellen White keep pushing under these circumstances? And it goes back to that dreamlike experience she had on October 10, 1901. That night she wrote in her journal, I mean, this is documented, folks. She said, I seemed to be living there. I saw patients sitting in wheelchairs under giant shade trees that seemed to form a tent-like canopy. Glendale and Paradise Valley had no tent-like canopy of trees. That's why she kept looking for a third place, something that would match what she'd seen in vision. Loma Linda did. But when she wrote that in her journal, Loma Linda did not match what she saw 4 years later as unoccupied property for sale for much less than its original cost. I wonder, why did John Burden keep pushing under these circumstances? And it goes to a letter that he received from Ellen White. She said, go ahead, money will come from unexpected sources. In the morning mail was a letter from a woman in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Nobody out here knew who that woman was, and we don't know to this day. I've tried. In her letter was a bank draft for $5,000, the exact amount that was needed less than 4 hours later on that deadline day.
Amen. Awesome.
They say there wasn't a dry eye in the place. One of the critics came up to John Burden. He said, it seems the Lord is in this project.
Awesome.
And Burden said, yes, and he will carry it through to victory. And that's exactly what happened, because instead of paying for Loma Linda in 3 years and 8 months, we paid for it in less than 6 months, received 2 additional discounts, totaling $1,100. The original purchase price of Loma Linda was $38,900, much less than its original cost. Money from an unexpected source for unoccupied property in Southern California that had a tent-like canopy of trees, 5 out of 5. That is statistically significant, we believe, under these circumstances. Miraculous.
Hallelujah.
Now, Loma Linda could have been closed numerous times over its history. And by the way, Harold Schreier, I wrote Harold's biography, was published by the Review and Herald Publishing Association. His father became Loma Linda's 6th physician. He told me that all of those people felt that they were working under a divine mandate. That was the term he used.
Awesome.
They had to succeed. And succeed they did. By 1920, the 6th School of Medicine in Southern California became the only accredited School of Medicine in Southern California.
Awesome.
We even took on the junior and senior medical students from the University of Southern California. One of them, a woman, became Seventh-day Adventists. I'll be making a reference to this $5,000 at the end of my talk, because I'm going to take you right up to date. This vision that she had on October 10, 1901, 9 days later, the Loma Linda Association placed their first advertisement in the Citrograph, claiming that they were just opening their new facility. It wasn't even close to being put up for sale for much less than its original cost. The editor of the Citrograph claimed that it was the best equipped sanitarium in the United States. I don't think it held a candle to the Battle Creek Sanitarium, but as far as he knew, it was the best. And embedded in that advertisement was a photograph of Loma Linda with one of its 2 tent-like canopies of trees, praise God. That tells us that the providence started 3.5 years before any Adventist set foot in Loma Linda.
Amen.
And it's going on to this day. And I will end in a little while with that. But in 1915, School of Medicine almost closed. And the women of this church saved this School of Medicine.
Amen.
We owed an astronomical $400,000. It was so much that the denomination held its annual meeting at Loma Linda. We had a tent city where the Centennial Complex is now located. There were 150 delegates from all over the world. The main reason for meeting in Loma Linda was to decide what are we going to do with this place. By that time it was called the College of Medical Evangelists.
Awesome.
The denomination had an ad hoc committee get together and discuss it to make a recommendation to the annual council. And they did. They decided that in order to supply the finances for Loma Linda, they would have to call in their foreign missionaries from overseas and turn their annual subsidies into Loma Linda. And they were unwilling to do that. So they recommended that we close the College of Medical Evangelists. Some people present there said, no, let's continue the School of Medicine, do the basic sciences in Loma Linda, and let the medical students finish their medical education somewhere else. Now, I don't know if this came up because it's not recorded, but I discovered in my research that Ellen White rejected both of those options before the School of Medicine even started. One evening, a gray-haired old gentleman stood up, got the floor. He said, "You know who I am? George I. Butler. I used to be the president of the General Conference. I had more counsel from Ellen White than anybody here, and most of it was critical." He said, "We found from personal experience if we followed her advice, we succeeded. When we failed to follow her advice, we failed." And he held up the testimonies regarding that School of Medicine. He said, when it comes time for Brother Daniels, that would be A.G. Daniels, the president of the General Conference and the chair of that annual council. When it comes time for Brother Daniels to call for a vote, here is one hand that has not yet learned how to vote to close what God says should be open. And he sat down. There were two more things that saved the school. One night, 4 non-delegate women knocked on the door and asked to be heard. It included Florence Gotzian. Josephine Gotzian was a wealthy widow. Dr. Florence Keller, a surgeon from New Zealand. Mrs. Stephen N. Haskell, a woman of faith and strong belief. And her sister, Mrs. Emma Gray. And they recommended that the denomination continue a full-course 4-year School of Medicine, and that the women of the church raise the money to build a clinical hospital in Los Angeles to be named after their sister who had just died, Sister White.
Wow.
Writing about it later, Percy T. McGann said a sacred hush pervaded over that meeting. And the third thing that happened was Percy T. McGann. And I have to tell you that Percy T. McGann had a colleague named Ed Sutherland. They were both ministers and they were both educators. They successfully moved the Battle Creek College to Berrien Springs, Michigan, and started Emmanuel Missionary College, now known as Andrews University. And then they moved to the south and started the self-supporting work in Madison, Tennessee. And there they met Newton Evans and asked him to be the medical director of their sanitarium. Now, Newton Evans was one of those medical students that Dr. Kellogg had finish his medical education somewhere else. He wanted to show to the world that he was doing a good job, and so he had some of them finish at some big-name schools of medicine. Newton Evans finished his medical education at Cornell University. He eventually became a pathologist and joined the faculty of the University of Southern California, of the University of Tennessee. And he accepted their position. Well, in Evans talked both of these gentlemen into becoming physicians. And they graduated from the University of Tennessee in 1914, the same year that Loma Linda graduated our first class of physicians. They attended University of Southern California and Vanderbilt. They rode motorcycle. They were old guys in their 40s when they became physicians. Well, by this time, Evans was invited to come to Loma Linda because he was such a good pathologist. We liked him so well, we asked him to stay. He taught a class in pathology, we asked him to stay. So he was there for the 1915 annual council, and he invited McGann to come out and join him. So McGann was a witness to all of this. Now, he had just finished medical school at a non-Adventist school of medicine, at a worldly school of medicine. So he spoke from experience, and he told the council what Adventist youth would be up against at a worldly school of medicine. Those people who wanted to close this College of Medical Evangelists could hardly answer his objection, and those people who were pulling for the school took a new grip. When the vote was taken, there was not one hand raised to close the College of Medical Evangelists. And Loma Linda has felt the success of the General Conference since that time to this day. The women of the church made rugs, sewed clothes, picked peaches. They raised $61,000 to build a 64-bed Ellen G. White Memorial Hospital, a cottage hospital in East Los Angeles. And you'll see a picture of it, the cottage hospital, in just a minute. Now, this story that I cannot read, I think what I'll do, I sit in my little quiet office on the 4th floor of the Delaware Library, and sometimes I find myself chuckling out loud, and sometimes I find myself reaching for the box of Kleenex. And that I had to do today several times. It's several pages. And so I'm not going to take the time to do it, but I will leave this for you folks, and you can read it yourself. But I just about guarantee that nobody here knows this story. It's how God ended World War I, and how that saved the College of Medical Evangelists. It's an incredible story. I'm going to leave this here for you. And another story of Providence. One Friday afternoon in 1975, about 3 p.m., after the faculty and students, I'm going to read this because I don't want to leave out anything that's really important. The faculty and students of the School of Nursing had left West Hall for the weekend. Dean Marilyn Christian cleared her desk and started to leave her office. By this time, she was the only one in the building, and it was totally quiet. She had been very busy, was tired, wanted to get ready for Sabbath, and had plans for the coming weekend. But as she stood to leave, a voice seemed to tell her she should stay. The impression was so compelling that she sat down again behind her desk. She didn't know why, but she felt strongly that she should not leave her office. Marilyn asked God, "Lord, if this is you directing me to stay, I need some further directions. What am I to stay for? What am I here for?" No response. So Marilyn sat down at her desk. She didn't feel inclined to start working again, so she just sat there, quietly waiting and sometimes praying out loud. 15 minutes passed and nothing happened. After 30 minutes, she continued waiting, asking God if her impression was from Him, and wondering why she was staying late. She really wanted to go home. Another half hour passed, and still she felt compelled to stay. Anyone who knew the dean knew that she didn't usually sit still long enough, at least for an hour. But this was different. She continued to sit, ask God for His direction in her life, and wonder what would happen. After a second hour passed, this would be 5 o'clock, Friday afternoon, the telephone rang. When Marilyn answered, She recognized the voice of Dr. Jesse Scott, Director of Nursing for the United States Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. Marilyn had known her from national meetings, but had no personal conversations with her. On the line with her was Dr. Joe Eleanor Elliott, the Director of the Western Interstate Commission on Higher Education and Nursing, a colleague Marilyn did know. The women called to announce the organization of a high-level national think tank. At this point, Marilyn jumped to the conclusion that the Lord had asked her to stay late because she was going to be asked to serve on the committee. Then, building on that assumption, she appreciated the fact that it was a national committee which would give her school national exposure. Dr. Scott proceeded to tell Marilyn that the committee would establish recommendations to be presented to the United States Congress on the future of nursing in America for the next 10 to 20 years. Questions to be addressed included: how many nurses do we need in America? Where should they be placed? What level of preparation do they need? How many staff nurses as well as leadership personnel with advanced degrees would be needed in various agencies, including VA hospitals, private hospitals, public health agencies, and nursing homes? Marilyn had heard something about the project, but had no idea that she would be asked to participate. The committee would cover a lot of material in a relatively short time. Marilyn had already thanked God for the opportunity He was giving her to be a member of this important meeting, and in her head she silently hoped that they would not have meetings on Sabbath. Committee members would include the presidents or their representatives of the American Medical Association, the American Hospital Association, the American Nurses Association, the National League for Nursing, the Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins University, Harvard University, Boston University, the University of Hawaii, and key people from other leading universities that have both schools of nursing and schools of medicine. Then they asked Marilyn to chair the think tank.
Wow.
She was almost overwhelmed. In acknowledging that they had offered her a wonderful opportunity and a big challenge, Marilyn felt that she needed to bring up a subject that was meaningful to her. Quotes, "But I hope you realize that I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, and there is no way." She was about to announce that she would be unable to work on Friday nights or Sabbaths. "Oh," Dr. Scott interrupted before Marilyn could say any more. "There will be no Friday night meetings. There will be no Saturday meetings. We will see to that. The first meetings are already scheduled, and they're all set up with no Fridays or Saturdays." Marilyn was amazed, thinking about what a responsibility they'd asked her to accept. She didn't feel qualified for this role by herself, but she knew that if God were involved, He would help her. Without knowing all the ramifications, Marilyn said yes, accepted the challenge, felt empowered by God to perform. The task both humbled and honored her. In accepting the invitation, she became the national chairman of the National Committee for the Analysis and Planning for Improved Distribution of Nursing Personnel and Services. She also knew why she had felt compelled to stay in her office that Friday afternoon. The first meeting was just 2 weeks away. Dr. Scott announced to Marilyn to come unprepared. "Come with what you have. You have what we need."
Awesome.
Amen.
After the call ended, Marilyn thought, "Oh my, now what in the world am I going to do?" She then bowed her head in prayer, thanked God for the telephone call, and said, "Lord, you know I could never do this without your help. Help me, please, to fulfill your spirit, to be filled with your spirit, to go on with the work I've been asked to do." The meetings were held alternately in Denver, Colorado, and Washington, D.C. over a period of 2 years. The 30 participants included government statisticians who provided reams of material to be considered. Marilyn didn't know exactly what the committee was going to be doing or how they were going to work. But anyway, she said, "Thank you, Lord." The committee's report became U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare Project number 24175-082, which was contracted with the Western Interstate Commission, Higher Education on Nursing, a subsidiary of the Western Association but schools and colleges. In reminiscing, Maryland states with conviction, we must be sure to give glory to God, because these kinds of things happen only as He works through us.
Awesome.
Amen.
Here is the Ellen G. White Memorial Hospital. It was opened in 1918. It was a cottage hospital. And the cottages were removed in 1937 when we built the Ellen G. White Memorial Hospital that I knew as a teenager. Now they have a brand new one that is multi-million-dollar facility. I need to get a picture of that too. Now in 1961, the College of Medical Evangelists, you can see over the doorway, it says College of Medical Evangelists, became Loma University. And in 1962, the Council on Medical Education really leaned on us because we were providing basic sciences in Loma Linda and clinical experience 60 miles away. We weren't the only ones who did that. Cornell University did that. Stanford University provided basic sciences in Palo Alto and clinical experience in San Francisco. But after the two world wars, they really leaned on us. One of our board members, I've been through 100 years of our board minutes, one of our board members called it a polite ultimatum. They had good reasons. They said, you're duplicating your library, you're duplicating your administrative offices, your students have to relocate 60 miles right in the middle of their medical education. In addition to that, we think it would be a good idea for your clinical faculty to be able to relate to your basic sciences faculty, and they can't do that when they're separated like that. Our problem was, where are we going to go? Are we going to move everything to Los Angeles, or are we going to move everything to Loma Linda? It was the greatest controversy in the more than 100-year history of the institution. The basic sciences faculty in Loma Linda absolutely refused to go to Los Angeles, and they were considered to be stubborn. Those people who supported them said, if you move it to Los Angeles, you will alienate the church constituency that has supported this place since almost the beginning, and it would be a mass violation of the writings of Ellen G. White. On the other hand, the volunteer clinical faculty in Los Angeles said, if you move it to Loma Linda, you will kill it. There still are not enough potential patients out there. It will not, its accreditation will not survive. So what to do? The Board of Trustees asked the administration to consult with the American Medical Association. They sent 4 deans from 4 major schools of medicine to Loma Linda. They came to Loma Linda first, then they went to Los Angeles. When they saw this, it was all over. This is the huge Los Angeles County General Hospital. When it was opened in December of 1933, it was the largest hospital in the world under one roof. Because of the importance of clinical experience in medical education, they were forced to recommend that we consolidate the School of Medicine in Loma Linda. This could accommodate as many as 3,700 patients in an emergency. We shared that with the University of Southern California. We had half of it. We had an excellent relationship with USC, which started its new School of Medicine in 1928, so we were back sharing the county hospital. Our deans got along famously. I mean, this doesn't usually happen, ladies and gentlemen. There's usually competition in a facility that has 2 schools of medicine. Their medical students were invited to join our classes. Our students were invited to join their classes. Our 2 deans went to travel together on the train to national meetings. So in 1961, our Board of Trustees voted to consolidate the School of Medicine in Los Angeles. But before that decision was implemented, they reversed themselves, and the writings of Ellen G. White played a major role in that reversal. I found the decision on September 25, 1962. It's quite lengthy and a little fuzzy. It talks a lot about what we're going to do at the White. We're going to enlarge that. If you read it carefully, you can see it says we're going to consolidate in Loma. But I was amazed the next day, on September 26, 1962, to see a second vote. Never seen that before. Some of the trustees felt that it would be well to declare in emphatic form re-emphasizing the decision to develop the School of Medicine on the Loma campus. Voted that the 4-year program of the School of Medicine be developed on the Loma campus of the Loma University. In effect, continuing the teaching of the basic sciences on that campus and transferring to the Loma campus the junior and senior classes as soon as clinical facilities can be made available. So we built Loma University Hospital, and that was its name at that time. And there you can see the footprint of that building. I wonder if I could give you a signal and you could make it, because this is not working right now. This was the largest single project ever undertaken by the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. $20 million was borrowed through the General Conference, not from the General Conference, was paid back with interest within 20 years. At that time, as many as 700 workmen fast-track built that university hospital in less than 3 years. At that time, Dr. David B. Henshaw, the Dean of the School of Medicine, became convinced that a 360-bed hospital would not be big enough. You see, that doesn't quite look right. Those towers are only 5 stories tall. So he talked the Board of Trustees into adding 2 more floors, took it up to 516 beds. Now, the new construction that we have going on, this was $20 million, is $1.5 billion.
Wow.
As many as 1,700 men will be working on that. And I want to share some. We did a feasibility study in 2002 and discovered that we're maxed out. And so we developed a hub and spoke model where Loma Linda would remain the hub and we would have spokes that would go out. The first spoke went to Beaumont and Banning, where we now have Loma Linda University Health Beaumont Banning. And then the second one went to Marietta. We found out that was an underserved area. That's halfway to San Diego. We found there was a group of physicians out there who were going to build a for-profit hospital that was going to be called Physicians Hospital Marietta. We presented the idea of a joint venture. They liked the idea. Their vendors liked the idea. But before this hospital was open, the United States government came out with a law that said you cannot build a hospital and refer patients to yourselves. So we bought them out. It's all Loma Linda. It says to make man whole in the lobby. It's a not-for-profit hospital. I went out there to take this picture the day that we graduated our 10,000th physician. I talked to the nurse in charge of the emergency department. I said, has your heliport ever been used? This was 3 weeks after their grand opening. He says, yes, it's been used as much as 3 times in one day. Our marketing people had focus groups out there to say, what are we going to name this place? They insisted that it be Loma Linda University Medical Center, Marietta. Next picture, please. The day that we had grand opening tours was Super Bowl Sunday of 2011. We were expecting 2,000 people. 10,000 people showed up. We performed the first open heart surgery in that area. That's their outpatient facility. Now, directly under the Children's Hospital is the world's first hospital-based proton treatment center. And Dr. James Slater, class of 1963, his first estimate was $3 million. His second estimate was $39 million. When it was opened, it was $85 million. And today, after 26 years of upgrades, it's well over $250 million. That's not how much we have in it. We've had a lot of help from the United States Congress, the United States Department of Energy, the United States Department of Defense, and NASA. The equipment alone weighs more than 400 tons. and it produces up to 250 million electron volts. Now this shows you why we're excited about this. This is a real CT scan, and in the very middle of that is a man's prostate gland. The white structures on the sides of the tops of his hips. Unlike X-rays, gamma rays, and neutrons that go completely through a patient and damage everything, you can see that's almost 70% that's going out in all directions. That's what causes the negative side effects. Protons are heavy, safe, fast, energetic, stable, subatomic, positively charged particles with mass, and they stop at a point called the Bragg peak. So now, by using computerized tomography, we can now aim and confirm an invisible beam on an invisible target with sub-millimeter precision. That means less negative side effects. That means greater quality of life. And that's why almost 20,000 people have come to Loma Linda from 59 countries of the world for proton therapy. Amen. Dr. James Slater, the father of the James M. Slater MD Proton Treatment and Research Center. Now, the man on the far left is Phil Livedall, the Deputy Director of the Army National Accelerator Laboratory. That was the world's largest proton accelerator, 4 miles in circumference. He helped to design our synchrotron. He became the first person to get totally protons for proton cancer, for prostate cancer. Here's a man who spent his entire career in physics research, and it came back to help him here in Loma Linda. Next to him is Congressman Jerry Lewis, who brought literally hundreds of millions of dollars into Loma Linda University. And next to him is Dr. Robert Wilson, the man who wrote a story that was published in scientific literature in 1946 entitled The Radiological Use of Fast Protons. So we named one of our gantries after him. There's Dr. Slater, and next to him is Daniel Goldin, the longest-serving director of NASA. In December of 1994, I accompanied Dr. Slater to NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C. And there we signed a 5-year memorandum of agreement for NASA to use our proton accelerator to help improve the safety of future spaceflight. On that occasion, I heard Daniel Goldin say 3 really profound things. Number 1, he said, this is the ultimate in technology transfer. The reason he said that is because Loma Linda transferred the technology from the high-energy physics research laboratories of the world into the hospital setting. NASA can learn from us what we do in patient care. We can learn from NASA what they do in space. NASA is involved in medical education. It was a 5-year memorandum of agreement. Ran out in December of 1999. They're still there. No new signatures. It's a gentleman's agreement. They like us, we like them. And the third thing he said was Loma Linda is NASA's gateway to Mars. I heard him say that. Now the reason he said that is because the greatest long-term danger for astronauts is exposure to charged particles in space, most of which are protons. And they come from solar flares, which are unpredictable. So NASA used to fly its space shuttles trying as much as possible to avoid solar flares. Now they're still involved with the International Space Station. They're still wanting to go to Mars, and they're still in Loma Linda. They've done research even this year at the Proton Treatment Center. Now you see that's Chinese up there. When I say Loma Linda is a relatively small, faith-based Seventh-day Adventist institution in Southern California, 3,500 students is far less than tens of thousands of students you find in the state universities. This relatively small, faith-based institution in Southern California has improved the quality of hospital care throughout the entire People's Republic of China.
Amen.
Now, if that doesn't sound preposterous, I don't know what does. In the book Testimonies for the Church, Volume 7, page 103, Mrs. White tells us why we are into medical work is to be a witness for God.
Amen.
And she gives 4 ways to do that. To relieve the sick and afflicted, awaken the spirit of inquiry, advance reform, and disseminate light. We're doing all 5 of those things in China. And Dr. Hart, our president, asked me to write a book on the 20th anniversary of the Sir Renran Shaw Hospital. That required me to go to China twice. And I can tell you it's not only true, it is profoundly true, and it is recognized by the Chinese government as profoundly true. He told Dr. Gordon Hadley that American hospitals were 30 to 40 years ahead of Chinese hospitals. A lady who knew that, Dr. Jen Chu, here's Dr. Hadley. The next one was Dr. Jen Chu. She's a cancer surgeon, and she was the president of what is now the Zhejiang University School of Medicine. I mean, talk about providence. There is providence all over this story, and this is current. This is going on to this day. She knew this about 30 to 40 years, and she wanted her medical students to benefit from a Western medicine-style university hospital. So she went to Hong Kong, and she talked to Sir Renran Shaw and asked him to build such a facility. He said, okay, on the condition that it be run by the same people who treated my mother at the Shanghai Sanitarium and Hospital back in the teens. Well, that's us. And that was started by Dr. Harry Miller. And Dr. Hadley says we would not be in China today if it were not for Harry Miller. He started 20 institutions throughout China, Manchuria, Mongolia, and 2 in Hong Kong. Here we are chairing our supervisory board of trustees. We have introduced to China physical therapy, respiratory care, laparoscopic surgery. That's where we go in ports instead of major incisions. Requires less healing time and with less pain. We introduced whole person care, trauma care, ethics.
Amen.
We reduced their length of stay by more than 50%. That's huge.
Awesome.
We reduced their use of intravenous antibiotics by more than 50%. That's huge. Now you can see the sign up there, it says the first JCI public hospital in China, Joint Commission International. We gave them mock surveys. The other university hospitals saw that and started lusting after that accreditation. Today there are at least 60 other Chinese university hospitals that are accredited by JCI. The Chinese government saw that. They raised their standards to match JCI standards. Then they required their university hospitals to mentor their community hospital. It has impacted the whole country.
Amen.
That's how we did it indirectly. But we've done it directly too. Our nurses and our physicians publish nationwide. And the Chinese government has sent more than 12,000 people to Sir Renran Shaw Hospital, where they spend up to 6 months with us.
Amen.
Now, one of the things that impressed JCI was the education of our nurses. Their nurses are diploma nurses who are mentored at the bedside and answer to the doctors. Our nurses have bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and PhD degrees from Loma University. This lady just got her PhD degree less than 3 years ago. And she is a vice president at Sir Renran Shaw Hospital. The first nurse to go there went there 6 months before this hospital was open. And on her first day, she met 100 nurses on their first day. And she was there only for 3 months. In China, you can't work in various hospitals. You work in one hospital and you stay there. So we couldn't hire experienced nurses. This lady had to bring them all up to speed. They were from different schools of nursing. She had to start with teaching how to wash your hands all the way to cardiopulmonary resuscitation. At the end of 3 months, she and her nurses requested that she stay another 3 months, and that was approved. When she finally left China after 5 years and 6 months, it was like leaving her family, her Chinese family behind. Now, several years ago, the Chinese government opened the Schaefer Hospital. This is 1,200 beds. It's a brand new hospital, about 10 miles away from the Sir Renran Shaw Hospital. And they asked Sir Rembrandt Shaw Hospital to manage it for the first 20 years. You can see LLU on the top of that building. That's because that's part of the Sir Rembrandt Shaw logo. Okay. And it's another picture of Ida Plinger. Okay, now back in 1980, this hospital became the only hospital designated by the state of California as a level 1 regional trauma center for the 41 counties. That makes it the highest level of care available to patients in more than 1/4 of the California landmass. We have one of the world's largest neonatal intensive care units, licensed for 84. That may go up to 110 with what we now call the campus transformation that's going on right now. Now here you can see more than 100 years of our involvement. On the left is one of the original cottage hospitals that we purchased in 1905. It was probably built in 1901 because the Loma Linda Association purchased the place toward the end of 1900, and this was probably built right away. And on the right is the Loma Linda Sanitarium, where I was born. Now I want to close with a letter that came to us in 1916 to Dr. Percy T. McGann, from a noted Midwestern medical educator. He said, on my way home, I happened to run across one of the most prominent and influential members on the Council of Medical Education. He incidentally mentioned to me that the status of Loma Linda is up before the committee at this time. Remarks which he made more than justified in reiterating what I said to you in my former letter, that the future of the Loma Linda Medical School is absolutely hopeless. The medical profession will not tolerate such a thing as a medical college under sectarian control. I am as certain as I am alive that the Loma Linda Sanitarium will never get any higher recognition than it gets now. If you are convinced that I am right, you would hesitate to ask poor men and women who have barely sufficient to supply themselves with the necessities of life and seldom are able to indulge in the smallest luxuries, to invest their hard earnings in an enterprise that has no future. Now this used to be my last picture, but we now have the campus transformation. Look what happened to the parking lot in front of the medical center. We took 60,000 truckloads of dirt out of that hole. And we had to build some parking structures. There's two right there. The one on the right is called P1. The one on the left is called P2. The one behind the Children's Hospital is P3. And the one we just opened at the faculty medical offices is called P4. And this is what we're building. And we've got some providence to report here. Raising $1.5 billion for Vision 2020 campus transformation included a California Health Facilities Financing Authority grant and was $165 million. That's two California votes that gave us a total of 165. And I just learned this last week, there's another vote that's coming up. We may get another 100 million out of that. Philanthropy, $350 million, including the lead gift of $100 million we got from one non-Adventist couple.
Awesome.
100 million. And then bond funding for $1 billion. In recorded oral histories, various participants were not hesitant to give credit where credit is due. These oral histories were conducted with Michelle Bassell, the Senior Vice President for Advancement, Carrie Heinrich, J.D., an attorney, Administrator and CEO of Loma Linda University Medical Center, Kent Hansen, J.D., General Counsel, and Angela Lawless, Senior Vice President for Finance. And then there was a lady who was involved, an attorney from San Diego. I need to do an oral history with her, non-Adventist. And when I was talking to her on the telephone, she used the word divine twice. I'm looking forward to talking with her. Bond funding resulted from a nationwide tour dubbed a road show to Boston, New York, Chicago, Princeton, New Jersey, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, wherever major financial centers were located. Ellen G. White, co-founder of what today is known as Loma University Health, once stated, "We have nothing to fear for the future, except as we shall forget the way the Lord has led us in His teachings in our past history." That's hanging on the wall on the corridor going to the School of Medicine Administration. It's also in stone at the Founders Plaza. At a December 2016 Loma Linda Chamber of Commerce annual installation meeting, a table of Loma Linda University Health administrators were overheard relating current events regarding the financing of the 2 new hospital towers to the historical event, where $5,000 arrived within about 3 hours of a deadline. This led to the recording of these oral histories. And this is what Kerry Heinrich said. I have to read this to you. "One of the remarkable things about working at Loma Linda is that I am reminded really daily that this is an institution that is built upon the grace of God and has been the beneficiary of many, many, many miracles through the course of its existence. That story of John Burden and the $5,000 check is a wonderful story, but there are remarkable events that are happening leading up to this particular project. The financing for a project like this is the most important part of the project. People look at a building when they see it, and they think about the magnificent shape and architecture of the building." Let's look at that's the last one. That's the one that I wanted to show next. The true miracle of that cloverleaf was all the effort that worked behind the scenes that happened to actually line up the financing. It's no different for this project today. It is hard to actually describe some of the differences that 50 years have brought in the cost of construction, from $20 million to $1.5 billion. The financing of our hospital has been a series of miracles. There isn't one piece to the financing, there are multiple pieces. This structure, when it's all built, will cost more than $1.5 billion. But the component parts of financing consist of bond financing. They consist of grants from the state of California under California Propositions 61 and 3. They consist of operational commitment dollars, meaning dollars we generate through operations that will go to pay for the cost of construction. And finally, philanthropy. The Vision 2020 goals for this project are $365 million. We have raised more than $265 million towards that goal. That was last August 8, which is an amazing series of miracles for this institution. Every one of these gifts, from the foundational gift by the Troches of $100 million to the many, many gifts, there are thousands of gifts, all of which in their own right constitute miracles. People who have been touched by the institution, people who, one way or another, have an affinity to the work and mission and calling of this institution, have given and given very generously. I think without question the philanthropy for this project really exceeds $365 million is an answer to prayer. One of the most remarkable things about that support has been the fact that a very, very significant portion of that has come from people who are not connected to the Adventist Church. They are individuals or entities that have been touched in one way or another by the mission and the message of this institution. I view that as a tremendous miracle. Heinrich concluded that the bond financing for the project was absolutely a miracle as well. We closed, this is what he said, we closed our bond transactions just at $1 billion. I signed the promissory note along with Kevin Lang, our CFO. Never in my life did I think I would be signing a promissory note for $1 billion, but in fact we did. It is a sobering experience to sign a promissory note and realize that over the next 40 years, generations of people that work here will all contribute to the repayment of those bonds. But the actual process of obtaining the bonds is a remarkable journey and continues to be this day. In the process leading up to the actual issuance of the bonds, and there are complex and detailed reasons for this, Loma Linda University Medical Center has not had a AAA or AA bond rating. We live in a region that is challenged economically, and the patients that we serve we view as our mission to serve. But we don't have large sums of cash lying around. We operate very tight margins. I might tell you that we do more than $150 million worth of charity every year. The bond rating agencies look at those things, like how much cash do you have on hand. It's measured in days of cash on hand. I did an oral history with the dean of the School of Medicine, and when he was a resident physician, he had to come in one Saturday night to help take care of a gangbanger who'd been involved in a fight. And he felt really bad for his chief, his resident, or the chief physician, a man in his 50s, who had to leave his family behind and come in on a Saturday night to take care of this gangbanger. And then he got to thinking, that's what we do.
Amen.
I have that on tape. That's what we do. But it's never been wealthy. I think in many respects that was God's plan. It makes us realize that our mission is to treat those who are underserved, to be a source of care for those who are in many ways disadvantaged. Our hospital operates as a very tight ship. It doesn't operate with huge sums of excess cash. When bond rating agencies look at that and look at your overall financial performance, they rate it in terms of your strength as a healthcare institution. In the period of time leading up to the issuance of our bonds, our bond rating was not what I wished it could be. Because of both the medical center's credit rating and the market conditions at the time, the interest rate could have been well in the neighborhood of 6 and 6.5%, or perhaps even higher. Heinrich reported that in preparation for the issuance of the bonds, medical center staff went through the process with a lot of prayers and hard work. I can't even begin to describe the enormous amount of work it takes to go through that process. Heinrich then told of the incredible, talented people in the medical center's finance department who prepared significant documentation as to the financial performance of the hospital over the past 5 years, and detailed analysis by internal and external experts as to what financial projections could be over the next 10 years. Now, this is Kent Hansen, General Counsel, added perspective from his experience. We have less than investment-grade bond ratings. It was tough. We knew it was tough. We prepared carefully. There were teams that worked day and night on this for months. Could we sell enough bonds with repayment over a 40-year basis to really build this thing the way we could and live with the interest rate? And if we didn't sell the bonds, then we probably would never have been able to sell the bonds and would eventually go out of business. That's how serious this was. The morning came for the sale of those bonds. It was early May of 2016, and we didn't know. When the bond markets opened back east, our offering was put about an hour into the market day. In the next hour, it sold out. We had enough subscribers. If they had been available, we could have sold 3 times as many bonds as we sold, at an historical low for interest rate, 4.8%. We are going to save $135 million on interest.
Awesome.
Talk about prominence. Every day on that roadshow, people back here and those in the show were praying. It's a modern era. We would share our prayers by text. The team here was praying together. If we were going to have an institution, this has to happen. But the Lord's going to have to make it that way. It would be virtually impossible for us to pull this off. He had to make a way. There is not a person involved in this institution that does not credit God with this. It wasn't one of those things where we've done this hard work and God came along and lent his name to our efforts. No, this was definitely the intervention of God. If you look back on the history of Loma Linda, we've had the funds when we needed them, clear back to the check that came to John Burden right down to the present times. I've come to realize that Loma Linda, by and large, does not have its prayers answered with money. It has its prayers answered with people who are able to carefully steward the place. Kerry Heinrich was a lawyer who had no prior experience in hospital administration, has turned out to be an able and excellent CEO, knows the place, loves the place. You have a hospital financial officer in Angela Lawless, who is 36 or 37 years old, now considered rated by national organizations as one of the best in the country. of what she does. We serve the church. We have never built up large endowments. We are not a place rolling in wealth like Stanford or USC, but we have that what they don't have, God who delivers for us. When our hearts are tuned to Him, toward Him, and believe in this administration they are open toward Him, they want to do His service. They say, this is our issue, Lord, and we can't, but you can. And we will be faithful stewards. We will be prudent. We will be careful, but we need the resources. Time and again, the Lord has come through. There's no way that Loma Linda would be what Loma Linda is at this moment and going down the paths that it's going to, unless God actually provided for us to do that without a shadow of a doubt. Now, these are the words of the 37-year-old Angela Lavas, Senior Vice President for Finance. God sustained. Everything just happened right when we needed them to happen. There were 3 things that had to happen on 3 separate days, and they all happened on those 3 separate days. I heard that one of these administrators lose his composure talking about that. It was just so amazing to witness how everything was just, it was a clear testament that it was God leading us through the process. We got to the point many times in the process where we felt we'd done everything and it was still not working. And now in hindsight, God was really telling us it's never about you and what you do. It's let me show you how I will deliver you through this. Just a lot of evidences that He was right with us, leading us through. He had everything in control. Regarding Carrie Heinrich, another miracle in our journey has been God just knows whom to put in place. It's so with Carrie. He has been called to such a time as this. Given the commitment, the plans, and the sincerity that really was evident in the presentation, in the story that Carrie and Kevin Lang were sharing, the bond investors believed and bought our stories. It's the mission of Loma Linda. We're not going to compromise the mission of Loma Linda. I've experienced it. I've been here 11, almost 12 years. That's just one of the most tremendous blessings, where each person that I encounter here in Loma Linda is here because of the mission. Everybody wants to be part of what would make it work so that the mission will be sustained. God is the leader of this place. From when He impressed Ellen White that this is the very place, He has one that guides. He is the one that guides and leads. Just the timing, how God works. It was perfect time to sell the bonds. He made it so. Who would believe it? Because of the 3-year historical performance leading into bond financing, 2012, 13, and 14, the organization didn't meet its targets. We were borrowing this large amount of debt. The ratings agencies downgraded our rating non-investment grade. One cannot imagine getting a 4.84% non-investment grade organization. It was all divine providence. He knew it was what we needed to make it work. Sometimes it's easy for us to just get into a state where it's just one challenge after another. I look back to what we've been through. It's so true. We have nothing to fear for the future except for the Lord, except we forget how God has led us in the past. Shame on you, Angela. How can you doubt when God has shown you over and over again that He is in control? She was saying shame on you for herself. I sometimes think about those 35 people who moved onto the Hill toward the end of 1905. Young people in their 20s and 30s. People who volunteered their time, ate out of the institution's garden until the place could pay for their meager salaries of $12 to $20 a week so that we could be there today to continue the teaching and healing ministry of Jesus Christ to make man whole. And now the most important words of my presentation this evening in one sentence. We need to give credit where credit is due.
Amen. Thank you, Brother Dick Schaefer. God bless you. Thank you for coming. And it was nice being at your church on Sabbath.
Glad you were there too.
Thank you. Why don't we all stand together? And I want to do something different for our closing prayer. Dolly, come up here. And I'd like everyone to join hands for our closing prayer. We're all going to sing, "Blessed be the tie that binds." God is so good, and we heard that message tonight. Blessed be the tie